Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change, He faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, thy God doth undertake to guide the future as He has the past. My hope, my confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, the waves and winds still know His voice who ruled them while He dwelt below. Be still, my soul, the hour is hasting on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still, my soul, when change and tears are past. All safe and blessed we shall meet at last.
We are standing on holy ground.
before I forget, I'd like to have you all sit down before I forget to tell you. And you know, I'm glad that Jeff found out how many had heard my testimony before and how many hadn't, because you know, for the best part, I'm going to try to give it as though none of you have ever heard it before, and that'll relax me a little bit. And I like to say that I'm just a little bit nervous. That's not quite right, because I'm very nervous. But I know that a lot of you, Brother Jeff told me the other day that he'd like to have me mention my relationship with the brother and sister Bill and Gladys Dow. Well, they were my aunt and uncle, and it was through their effort that my family committed the message. I have to use my notes here because I'm 25 now, you know, the third time around, and if I don't use these things, I sometimes forget. So please forgive me for referring to them. Gladys and Bill were in a meeting with when Brother Branham preached the 7 church ages, and you know, when the pillar of fire came into the church the following week, you know, he had previously, each night he had preached on one of the church ages. He had drawn purposely on the blackboard a circle, and he would show just a little light in there to show how much of truth there was in the still the Bible coming through to the people. And each church age it would get smaller and smaller and smaller, of course. And they were there when he did that. And then the following Sunday, I think you can hear it on one of the sermons, where the angel of the Lord came into the church, and it went right through one of the posts, and I didn't see it, but they tell me that it stopped, and it changed itself just exactly like he had drawn it the previous week. And they were there when they got to see that. And then also, I think, you know, the Holy Spirit, I guess, I think it was when the Pope went to Israel for the first time. I think even the moon verified what Brother Branham had drawn as pertaining to the church ages prior to that. And, you know, a lot of you have heard Brother Branham preach, and you know how forceful he could be when he was ministering. But you know, as an individual, he was a very humble person. You know, he had an atmosphere around him when you was with him that you just didn't want to leave. You felt quite at ease with him. You know, he would talk to you in such a way that he'd want to know all about you. He'd want to know what kind of work you did. He'd want to know about your family and so forth. You know, that you just kind of hated to leave him. I like to tell you a little bit of those things, you know, because a lot of people don't really have an idea of the type of person he was away from the pulpit. You know, he was a very humble brother. He was very respectful. I know that a lot of times you see him wear a hat. If you see him out on the street, you know, if you'd see one of the sisters, he'd always take his hat off when he's talked to them. You know, he's very respectful of them. And first time I was in his home in Jeffersonville, he had that 7-foot grizzly bear that he had shot on that trip at Bud Southwick's. He also had the caribou he had mounted on the wall. And he had a tape measure there, and he invited me to measure the length of those horns. You know, of course, I wouldn't do that, but the amazing part about it, those horns never did shrink. Brother Branham said it was set 42 inches long, and that's what they were, and they never shrunk. They always stayed that way. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the tabernacle too. You know, that I thought maybe you've heard different people give the testimony. They always talk about what they saw about Brother Branham and so forth. But you know, the tabernacle was kind of unusual. You go down there, you had to stand in line maybe outside for 3 or 4 hours if you wanted to get in. And the deacons would always keep the doors shut. And there was 3 outside doors to the tabernacle. And the deacons would open all 3 doors at the very same time. And they always waited till 9 o'clock in the morning. And the reason they did that, is because people would have been in there at midnight the night before to get a seat. I'd have probably been along with them. And when they opened that door, they filled up from the front first. They didn't fill up from the back. They filled up from the front first. And it'd be an overflow crowd. And I know a lot of times maybe I'd sit along the side and maybe there'd be 3 or 4 other brothers standing right beside me. And we'd all share that same seat. You wonder how you're going to do that. Well, I would sit down maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, and the next brother would get up. I'd get up, and the other one would sit down, and then he'd sit down there for 10 or 15 minutes. And it just kept going like that. And if you're lucky, you got to sit down twice during the meetings. And it was just a wonderful atmosphere there at the church all the time. And when Brother Branham was living in Tucson, we'd still go down to the tabernacle because we thought an awful lot of Brother Neville and Sister Linda's dad. And we'd always go down there. We'd enjoy the meetings. And Brother Doc, I don't know if you ever heard much about Brother Doc Branham, but that was one of Brother Branham's younger brothers. And Doc he had several hats, He was the official greeter, and nobody could make him feel any more welcome than Brother Doc could. And he was also the janitor of the church, and he was a song leader, and also the Sunday school superintendent. And being a Sunday school superintendent, before the church service would start, he would get up and give his report. And Doc had a good sense of humor. And anybody that had a birthday, like my wife had one yesterday, then they would invite them to come forward, with their pennies for each year that they would live, And I don't want to embarrass my wife because I don't think she's got that many pennies to start with. I got a wonderful wife, I got, Brother Branham says that a good woman, a good wife is a jewel in a man's crown, and I sure got one. And I really love her and appreciate her. Now I'll start my testimony. It was my mother's birthday in June of 1960. And Mom says, I asked her, I said, Mom, what can I do for you? What can I get you for your birthday? She said, well, go hear Brother Branham. And I thought, well, that's a strange request for a birthday present, but okay. So this is when Brother Branham was down in Chautauqua. And if you don't know where Chautauqua is, it's a little campground down between Dayton, Ohio, and Middletown. And it was the first time I'd ever gone to a campground. I didn't know what a prophet was. I had no idea what a prophet was. I hardly knew what a preacher was. And when we got down there, the service had already started. It was an overflow crowd, and it was kind of like a pole building. I know that Brother Branham, I could see Brother Branham up there at the pulpit. And the overflow crowd, they were sitting out into the lawn area, had chairs, they had speakers out there. I could hear him, I could see him. And he got to preaching, and he got to talking about the women, the worldly women, about how they dressed and how they acted. I thought, he's pretty good. And no sooner thought that, and he says, and you men smoking cigarettes. If the Lord would have wanted you to smoke, he'd have built you with a smokestack. And I thought, wow. That really stuck with me. I didn't do anything right then, but it stayed with me, and I'll bring it up a little later on as I go into my testimony here. And Sister Gladys, she would go to all the meetings that she could. She'd always get the tapes, and when they come back, they'd invite us over for a meal or something, and because she'd have maybe a portion of that sermon that Brother Branham had preached, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. She'd have it isolated on this tape, and she'd want us to hear it, hoping that we would accept the message. You see, And so we'd sit and listen to her, but it really wasn't our time yet. It really didn't mean anything to us. But you know, she never gave up. She just kept always witnessing to us every chance that she could. And finally, she got into one of Brother Branham's fast prayer lines. I don't know if any of you know what that is or not, but when Brother Branham would have his meetings, there'd always be 10, 15, 20 preachers there. So after he'd have his sermon, he would come up, he would invite the preachers to come forth and have a prayer line. And he would have them facing one another, and then in between there would be a little walkway. And as the people who wanted to be prayed for would line up and start to come through, these preachers would lay hands on them and pray for them. And Gladys got in one of these prayer lines. And as she approached Brother Branham says, Sister Dow, she says, what do you have need of? And she says, the salvation of my family. And he started to pray for her. As he was praying, she felt led to call out my wife's name, Marilyn. And Brother Branham completed his prayer. He says, today, the Holy Spirit will start to deal with your request. And when they could go back to Lima, you know, Debbie and Tammy were just little then. They were about 6, 7 years old. And they loved him, you know, they just like grandkids to them. First thing they did was drive back to see him. And as they come in the driveway, you know, Marilyn wanted to know all about the meeting. The first time that she'd really ever showed much interest. And he said, "There's water down here, Jeff? I got to get me a drink." It's the first time that Marilyn had ever showed any interest in the meetings. And Gladys brought a tape player back, and I think Marilyn started listening to the church ages. And the reason I think was the church ages, because I remember she would be doing the dishes or ironing or something of that sort, and she would stop the tape, make a little note, and the first chance she gets, she'd go up to the library and check out what Brother Branham said about the church ages. And she always found him to be right, yeah. So she just really started hearing more and more tapes all the time. She gave her heart to the Lord, you know, and I saw a big change in her, you know. That's where I started listening too, and I repented and asked the Lord to come into my heart and give my heart to the Lord. And here we're both young Christians. And my dad and my mother were separated at this time, and Dad kept coming around the house too because he too loved Debbie and Tammy. You know, they was cute little kids, and we got to witnessing to him, and he too wanted to serve the Lord. So this is in 1961. So here we are, 3 young Christians, just babes in the Lord, that they wanted to be baptized. So we went down on Easter Sunday of 1961, and we were baptized. And, you know, when we were down there, it was the first time I'd really been at the tabernacle. And there again, I found out that you had to stand in line because everybody was standing outside. And I still had that smoking demon on me. I couldn't get rid of it. I tried several times to quit smoking. I couldn't do it. I was standing outside, and I often wondered what the people thought, because here I am with a bunch of believers, and I'm sitting out here smoking a cigarette in the corner of 8th and Penn Street in Jeffersonville. And if any of you have been down to the tabernacle, you know there's a sewer on that corner. And I stand there, and I had that cigarette in my hand. I said, "Lord Jesus, with your help, it would be the last one I'll ever smoke." And I threw it in that sewer. I went into that tabernacle, and I was baptized, you know. And, you know, as we left and we started going home, my dad was stopped at the restaurant about halfway back. My dad bought a pack of cigarettes. Now, he hadn't smoked for 5 years. In fact, he had quit smoking, and he had got on me about smoking. He said how bad it was on my health to smoke, and he was kind of preaching to me. But you see, that spirit left me and went on my dad. My dad was sincere when he was baptized, but he never really followed the message. In fact, he used to kind of make fun of me for spending what little money I could get a hold of to go hear who I believe to be the prophet of God. And then So I'll get into that a little bit later on again. Yeah, then shortly after that, Uncle Bill had that heart attack that you hear Brother Branham talk about. And Gladys called Brother Branham up and asked him if he would pray for him, because the doctors had told Gladys that Uncle Bill wasn't going to make it, that he didn't have a chance. And Brother Branham said, I'm going to drive to Lima. So he came all the way up to Lima. And when he came up to Lima, he went into the hospital room and he shook Uncle Bill's hand. He said, I'll believe you're going to be all right, Brother Dow. He says, I'll see you in church again. I'll shake your hand on the street. And he didn't say, thus saith the Lord. You know, a lot of times Brother Branham, he would say things like that, and it was thus saith the Lord, but he never punctuated it quite like that. And but sure enough, it was. And then they said they was going to have to run some tests on Uncle Bill, so they took him upstairs for stress test or something, whatever they had to do. And they said he was going to be busy for about 2 hours. So Gladys wanted me to take him out to their home, to see their home. And, you know, Brother Branham was always very alert to scriptural numbers and scriptural things. And as we drove up to their house, he noticed that they had 3 outside doors. He also noticed that the stairs going into the porch, Uncle Bill had trouble with his hip, so then when they remodeled, they made real little tiny steps. And there were 7 steps going up to the porch. And then from the porch into the house, there was 5 more steps. And Brother Branham caught that immediately. He saw how those numbers added up. And we all walked in through the house, and he commented to me, he says that how much respect he had for Brother and Sister Dow. He said because that they chose to live humble. You know, they were wealthy. He could have had a chauffeur. They could have had servants, but they didn't. They chose just to live humble, and Brother Branham respected them for that. After that, you know, just a young Christian, you know, you have a lot of trouble sometimes believing that God could really forgive you for your past. You know, that was the way it was with me. You know, one time I stopped out here on Route 75 down there by Walpock. And I had my Bible, and I was wondering, now, Lord, if my past by just believing, can I be forgiven all these things? You know how that you can do that. And for some reason, I was starting to read into Romans chapter 5, and chapter 6, 7, 8. If I could paraphrase, you know, it told me that if you be in Christ, all things are forgiven. You know, it's a new life. And this, I thank the Lord. That's exactly what I wanted, what I needed. And I thought, now, Lord, if I know that the devil's going to come right back at me and try to make me doubt that. He's going to try to say it's just a coincidence that my eye hit that scripture. I asked if I could have an interview with Brother Branham. And 2 weeks from that time, I was in the tabernacle, and Billy Paul called me in, and I had that interview with Brother Branham. And Brother Branham was sitting in his study just before he went out to preach, and he told me everything that I'd done, and that I'd been forgiven. It was wonderful. And before he did that, it's probably the most wonderful experience I've ever had. I just felt like the presence of the Lord just came to settle right down over me. It's marvelous. It's been real precious to me all this time. Let's see. I remember one time that Brother Branham had come out of his study before he was starting to preach. The congregation was singing. As they was coming out, he noticed this little girl that was in a body cast. I don't know what's wrong with her. She had some sort of an ailment that affected her spine. And they had to have her in a little body cast. And Marilyn and I prayed for that little child several times, you know, we noticed about her. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we'd see the mother come in there with that little baby. And we saw this one time, Brother Branham stopped, and the congregation kept on singing, but he went over to her and he put his hand on her. You could see that he's prayed for her. And the next Sunday he come back, the body cast was gone. He's healed. And I was there when Brother Way died. And Brother Branham quieted the audience, and he come around in front of the pulpit, and he checked Brother Way's pulse, and he told me afterwards, I saw him over the restroom, he told me afterwards, he says, you know, he felt for his pulse, and there's no pulse. He said, but when he called for his spirit in the name of the Lord Jesus, he said his pulse come back like that. He was in church that night. Brother Way was in church that night. He looked like a truck had hit him. But he was all right, and he lived, I think, for 8-9 years after that. And we were privileged to be there when that happened. And then a lot of times we go out to these different meetings, you know, wherever I had an opportunity, I'd go to these other meetings in other cities, and maybe I'd be sitting out here in the audience, and you know, Brother Branham, after he had preached, then he'd have a prayer service, and people would come up and he'd pray for them, and then as the Holy Spirit would lead him out into the audience, you know, several times he'd be sitting in a row out there, and maybe a person a couple seats down. The Holy Spirit would, pillar of fire would settle over him. I never got to see it, but this pillar of fire would settle over him, and he'd tell him what was wrong with him. He'd just go right down the road, boom, 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 boom. And we were there when that happened. You know, just time after time after time that happened. And then, I don't know if you've ever heard Brother Branham refer to as Brother Mills. Well, Brother Mills was a good old brother, you know, when the Holy Spirit would hit him, he'd shout out, "Hey!" And no warning, you know, he just, whenever the Spirit of the Lord would hit him, he'd just shout out, "Hey!" Well, I was down there one time for communion. And, you know, they had, the way they'd serve communion, they'd have the church would be similar to this, you know, they'd have one row come up. The deacons would have all of them come up first. And they would serve this row, this section. As soon as they would serve, they would very quietly go back. And then they would move over to the next one. In the meantime, that row would come up. And that's just how they did it, very reverently. And of course, they used the little cups, you know, to serve communion. And it took a lot of them, you know. Brother Branham would always pray over the trays. He would stand back to the back, you know, and the deacons would be the ones actually serving the communion. And you'd see him, they'd take the tray up to him, you'd see him pray over him, you know. The rest of the time, as the people would take communion, you know, he had eagle eyes. And he'd stand there and he'd look at you. And I mean, he just looked right through you, you know, and it just wasn't me, it was everybody. You know, I talked to other people who said that they experienced the very same thing. And here, unbeknownst to me, I was up there this one time, and Brother Mills was standing right beside me. And just as I was reaching for this cup, hey! That was quite an experience. One time we was out in Phoenix, and I drove brother and sister down out to Phoenix, and Marilyn and the girls couldn't go because it was in January, it was their birthday. And the kids were still in school, so we got out there. It was her birthday, and I asked Billy Paul, I said, "Billy," I said, "do you suppose we could get Brother Branham to say something to Marilyn on her birthday?" He said, "I don't know." He says, "I'll find out." So I talked to Billy Paul, and sure enough, he invited me over. He was over to the motel room, and I called up Marilyn and wished her happy birthday. And I said, "There's somebody here who wants to speak to you." And Brother Branham got on the phone, and he told her, he says that, well, amongst the other things, he said he saw us walking hand in hand down the streets of gold. And you know, that's a promise to all believers. You know, everybody believe in the Bible, believe in this message. That's a promise that all of you have to look forward to. It's kind of nice when a prophet, if God tells you that. It's quite a birthday present for him. And another time we was in one of the meetings, I was in Topeka, Kansas. And this time, you know, Topeka is where all these tornadoes seem to originate. And there again, I drove the Dallas up to the auditorium where the meeting was going to be. I had to go there about 3 hours early. And it was getting out of the car. It was a nice day, it wasn't any clouds or anything. And all at once there was a clap of thunder, just like a cannon went off. And it seemed strange because the skies was clear. And then I went ahead and parked the car, and I come back, and an hour or so passed, and the hair started getting a little bit stormy looking. Another hour passed, and it started looking real bad. And then pretty soon the air raid siren went off. And this is the way they warn people in Kansas that there's a tornado approaching. And sure enough, the tornado had been sighted. It had touched down. It was coming right towards Topeka, about 5 miles out. And some of the people who were with Brother Branham in the motel said that he come out and he saw it. And he said, it's going to be all right. He said, it's going to break up and the sun will come out. And that's exactly what happened, just like he said it would. We were there. Another time we went to I told him earlier, I said, Brother Branham was out in Phoenix, but I said, squirrel hunting season is going to start Monday. And I said, I bet you that Brother Branham's going to come back, and he's going to come back here if to go squirrel hunting. So let's go down to hear Brother Branham preach. So we went down, we decided to go down, and the night before I couldn't sleep. I just was awake all night long. I just tossed and turned all night. And we got down there, sure enough, Brother Branham was preaching that day. And we got down there, and I was fighting sleep. And they open up with prayer, and you close your eyes, you bow your head, and boy, from then on, I was really struggling. And about halfway into the message, I fell asleep. And brother, the next thing I heard, I believe that's right, Brother Brown. I was wide awake from then on. My mother had developed diabetes. And she was just a young Christian, and she was a little bit mixed up, I guess, on healing. She kind of got a little confused on whether healing was always supposed to be a miracle or what. And she'd been living with the Dows at that time, and taken her to the hospital, and they tried to regulate her blood, and finally got it regulated where it should be, and they dismissed her. And she's back living with them, and she's about 2 weeks out of the hospital, and she got real sick. She would just burn her up with fever one minute, and the next minute the bed would just shake, and she'd just be freezing. And I was really worried about her. And I had childlike faith, and I thought if I could ever get a hold of Brother Branham to have him pray for her, she'd be all right. So I called Brother Branham up. He was out in Tucson then. I said, Brother Branham, I said, Mom's terribly sick. I just wonder if you'd pray for her. And he asked me, he said, where's she at? And I said, right there. He says, is there a phone by the bed? I said, yes, sir. He says, well, let me talk to her. So he talked to her on the phone, and I just knew that she'd be all right. And he hung up the phone, and here 2-3 hours passed, and she got worse. And I said I had childlike faith, and I did. I called him right back just like a child would. And I said, Brother Branham, I said, Mom's not any better. In fact, she's worse. I said, I can't understand it. And he said, well, I can't understand it either. I remember saying that. He said, wait a minute. See, the Holy Spirit at that time showed him. He said, wait a minute. He said, ask her if she's taken all her medicine. I said, Mom, are you taking all your medicine? And here, you see, she had been taking her pills and been cutting them in half. She thought that taking medicine was wrong, and she thought if she cut the pills in half, it would be half as bad. And the Lord showed him that, you see, and he told her, he says, you take her medicine and she'll be all right. And she did, and she was all right. Little Billy Paul is Billy Paul's son, Paul Branham, who works at Voice of God today. He was just a little fellow, that babe, a couple years old. And we were staying at the Holiday Inn in Clarksville. And they had a swimming pool there, and Debbie and Tammy were just young then. I think they were maybe 10, 12 years old. And they were swimming in this pool the Holiday Inn. And Brother Branham brought his grandson out. And Paul probably was at that time about 2 years old. And Brother Branham said, well, he had to go, and he was going to leave his grandson. And he looked at me and he says, watch him. And Brother Branham left. And little Paul, he was stepping up and down on the, the handrail that they had going into the pool. He'd step down and he'd giggle, he'd have a fun splash in the water, and he'd get back up. Then he'd do it to go in, and pretty soon he fell. And he fell in the bottom of the pool. And I was in the pool immediately, and I had him out of there. Just instantly, clothes and all on. And I asked him one time when I saw him down at the Tabernacle over at the Voice of God when they had one of the dedication meetings, and I talked to him about that, and he says, he says, even though he was just a little fellow, he says he remembered seeing me come in that pool to get him. You can ask him about that. Oh, then when, we was in Shreveport 2-3 different years. We was also in the Phoenix meetings 2-3 different years. One of the times we was in Shreveport, Uncle Bill started hemorrhaging, and he started spitting up blood. We had to rush him to the hospital. And this was the last night of the meeting that particular year. And when I knew that Brother Branham would want to know about Uncle Bill's condition, so I went to the motel where they were staying. I knew where motel he was at, and I knocked on Brother Branham's door. It was about 2:30 in the morning. And I told him about Uncle Bill, and he says, well, where's he at? And I told him, and he said, well, you go on back. He says, I'll be there in a little bit. So after he got his clothes on, getting packed, ready to come home, he come up to the hospital. And he and I was going up on the elevator together. And he told me, he said, I believe he'd be all right. All I saw was a little blood. And there again, it was, thus saith the Lord, but he didn't say, thus saith the Lord. He said, all I saw was a little blood. And it was, rode up on that elevator, Brother Branham was standing behind me. And I could feel him discerning in my spirit. It was the strangest thing. I could just feel him discerning in my spirit. Yeah. But he went on upstairs, and sure enough, he went in there and he told Bill, he said, I believe you're going to be all right. He said, I believe you'll be okay. We went down to the next day, Bill wanted to go home. And they wouldn't let him. They said that, man, that's sick, in that age, he was in his 90s. And Gladys had told him that she had been a nurse, a registered nurse, And they said to her, you mean you were a nurse and your man this sick and you'd take him out to drive 1,000 miles with him? And they kind of shamed her into it, and so she decided not to do it. And I think it was kind of out of the will of the Lord. And Uncle Bill, he kind of got aggravated about it. And the next day, he was determined that we was going to come home. I'd stayed back to bring him home because I knew that they had to have somebody bring him. So the staff, the hospital, the doctors and the nurses were so sure that we would not make the journey with Uncle Bill that they let us sign a statement that they was taking him out of the hospital against their wishes, against their instructions. And as we went down to the car, Uncle Bill had to spit. And when he spit, it was just his blood, it was blood red, it was just like ketchup, he spit. And the nurse looked at Gladys, and Gladys looked at me, and Uncle Bill saw what was happening, and he pushed us all aside and got in the car. We drove 1,000 miles, came home. And at that time, Dr. David Steiner, not the Steiner that's here now, it was his father. Dr. David Steiner and Bill were very good friends. They had an association probably a little bit like Brother Branham and Sam Adair had. They were both farmers at heart, and they both had cattle, both served on the bank board. And when we arrived back to Lima, it was the middle of the afternoon on Saturday. And here, Dr. Steiner was in Bill's driveway. And Bill says to Doc, she says, "Doc, what are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I got a call that you wasn't going to make it." And Uncle Bill, he was so well, you know, that he went in and showered and got dressed up because they had a bank meeting that night, and he went over to that bank meeting. It was something. I thought that was great, huh? I had Gladys one time. We was out in Phoenix, and this, Gladys had served on the election board. She was, when you go into to vote, you have somebody, he'd check where you live, you'd check your name on there. That's what she did. She'd check their names off the ballots. And this one, they just changed the new style of voting machines. And this fellow, he come in there, an older guy like me, I guess, and he voted. And she verified that was his name, and he voted. They went over and they put it in the ballot box. And he started out the door, and he says, "Come back." He said, "I think I want to change and vote for the other guy." She told him, she said, "Well, I don't think you're allowed to do that. Once the ballot's in the box, that's it." So anyway, the guy that he would have liked to have voted for lost the election. And of course, the Holy Spirit, starts to wants to protect you, but the devil, is always after you, And the devil was trying to get her for doing, sounded she was wrong in doing that, And it said that, you're going to ruin brother, your husband's good name and all this type of thing, And he really had Aunt Gladys down. And I could see that something was wrong. I says, "Aunt Gladys," I says, "why don't you go see Brother Branham?" "Oh, I can't." I said, "Oh, something's really eating at you. I can see that." So finally she agreed to see Brother Branham. And we went out this is when he was out in Phoenix, and we drove up to the motel where he was at. It was kind of L-shaped, and it was a 2-story motel. And as I drove into the parking lot, I pulled over and parked, and the office was in the entranceway of this parking lot. And I walked over there to see what room Brother Branham was in, and his room happened to be right behind a stairway. And it was a solid brick stairway. As I said, it was a 2-story motel. And as I was coming out of the office to see where Brother Branham, or what room he was in, I saw him come out of his room. And he come out of that room, and he walked around that stairway, and I could see that he was just like following something. And he walked right around that stairway, right over to the car, and started talking to Aunt Gladys. And he told her, he says, "Don't worry about it." He says, "The man lost the election anyway," and told her by exactly how many votes he lost by. When one time we was out in Phoenix, my dad died suddenly, and I was really worried about his soul because, I knew how Brother Branham had talked about smoking and everything, and the fact that Dad never followed the message. So Marilyn told me, she says, "Well, call Brother Branham up before we leave." So I called him up, and he caught my spirit right away. He knew that I was really worried about my dad's soul. He said, "Well, Tom," he says, your dad will not be in the bride." He said, "But he's saved." He said he believed when he was baptized. And see how important that is? Even though he never really followed the message, but he believed when he was baptized. That was a real comfort to me, I come back, I was on a little business trip one time, and my dad had been a railroader. He never had a pocket watch, watch, he always had a pocket watch. And after he retired, he bought this wristwatch. And he found out he couldn't wear it because it turned green on his arm. Some people just can't stand to wear gold. And he'd given it to me. And I was on a business trip, I was in Baltimore. I was on the side of the bed praying, and I was thinking now, I just wonder if Brother Branham said that to me just to make me feel good. And there was a glow that came around that watch. Yeah. It was real precious to me. Okay, and then the last meetings I was ever in was in Shreveport. That's when Brother Branham preached on the wings of a snow white dove. And he kept preaching, he kept singing that song over and over and over, you know. And then you hear him say on there, "We're waiting on you, Lord." And when he said, "We're waiting on you," we were cleared the back, and it was like a cloud that just settled over the whole congregation. And we got to see it. And also, Debbie at that time was real sick. She was just burning up with strep throat or something, I don't know. And we was in the back row with Gladys, and she was sitting right beside Sister Branham. And we asked Sister Branham, after they dismissed the church in service, we asked Sister Branham if she would mention to Brother Branham about Debbie and have him pray for her. And because we had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and this was about 10 o'clock at night, and she was just burning up with fever. And the next morning at 3 o'clock when we got up, she was perfectly well. Wasn't a thing wrong with her. The Lord had really touched her, yeah. And just before he preached that Shreveport meeting, I was up in his room with him, and his motel room, and he was telling me about different people having dreams of his end. And he says that about his dying. He said that he said perhaps he said that a lot of people said about his dream about he was going to die, and he said perhaps shot. And he pointed to a hole here and here. And of course he died from the automobile accident, you know. But you know, they had been feeding him through the throat. And they had operated on his head because to relieve the pressures on his brain. And that's the way he died. He had the 2 holes that he told me about. And when they brought the body, after he died, they brought the body back to the tabernacle. It was a real stormy night, and Brother Perry Green brought the body back with a little private plane. And we were at the airport, and I helped carry the casket off that plane. As I said, it was a real stormy night. It was a bank of clouds, real solid bank of clouds. It was quite low. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen that picture of that woman that was shattered to death in Southern Pines, you know, that had that, she was shattered to death. Well, there was one cloud that was just below the rest of the level of clouds. And if any of you have seen the movie The 10 Commandments, you know, in the 10 Commandments, how the death angels seem to slither around the streets, you know. That's the way this cloud was going. It was just kind of slithering around. And it just put a fear of the Lord in you, you know, you saw it. You know, and we went into the room, we commented about it, how evil looking it was. And we went back out and it was gone. It was just like a big weight taken off of it. And I talked to some of the others the next day about it. I talked to Banks Woods, who lived right beside Brother Branham. And he said, yeah, he said he saw the same thing. And it came right over Brother Branham's house, and it broke up, disappeared. And then, of course, then when they had the funeral, had the body at the funeral home, Billy Paul was standing at the head of the casket. And I was up there and talking to him. I said, Billy, I says, you care if I touch Brother Branham's hand? He said, no, brother, go ahead. And I put my hand on his hand. And I went back and I told Merlin, I said, you know, my hand got warm. And I was back up there talking to Billy again, maybe half hour later, an hour later, when the crowd seemed to thin out again. I touched Brother Branham's hand again, and this time it got warm up to my elbow. Now, I wasn't seeking a sign. I never even thought about it. I was up there just before they closed this funeral home for the evening. And I was talking to Billy one more time, and I was looking at the remains of the prophet. And I was thinking of all the things that I'd seen, the miracles that we saw in the different churches, different services, thinking about Mom's healing and Uncle Bill's healing, my personal interview, all these things was going through my mind. You know, I was right on the verge of tears. You know, I put my hand on his hand. Electricity went all the way through me. I've always been kind of slow spiritually, it seems, but the next day it dawned on me that it was quickening power from the bones of Elijah. And then when they did have the service at the tabernacle, there was probably 300 or 400 people standing out in the parking lot after they'd taken the body away. It was kind of an overcast day, and you could see the sun. And somebody said, "Look at the sun." And it looked like hands of a clock that got on the sun. It just started spinning. It got rid, and it just went back to the same thing over and over and over. I don't know what it meant. I don't think anybody did, but even in death, I believe God vindicated his prophet. That's about all I have to say, so I hope it wasn't too boring to somebody. I know I was quite nervous standing up here in front of all of you. So I guess that's it. I'll just close with God bless you and turn it back to Brother Jeff.
For us that are older, we know what God has done in this generation. There's not a doubt in our heart and our minds. But for those that perhaps that are younger or newer to the message, God sent a prophet lest he would come and smite the earth with a curse. And so God had left an option open in Malachi 4:5. "Truly I'll send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and children of the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." So Elijah was prophesied to come before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Brother Branham was then known as this ministry developed that he would also be privileged to be the seventh angel of Revelations 10:7. The seventh angel of Revelations 10:7, and it would be his honor as God's vessel to open the seven seals, which would close the book for the New Testament for the Gentiles, according to the prophet himself. So why would God send a prophet? Well, namely, because to gather a bride, but two, because it's the end time. And very soon the Lord's going to come and take his church home. And you might say, well, it's been 50 years. 50 years is not even hardly a second in God's time. We're still feeding and rejoicing on there are people by the tens of thousands that are still alive that were able to witness that prophet and the things that took place. How many enjoyed that this morning? Enjoyed that very much. I noticed you were very, very quiet, very reverent, sitting on the edge of your seat, and I just appreciated those testimonies. Also, I want to just say this too, that if there's anyone here that has a problem with cigarette smoking, and you want deliverance, we'd love to pray for you right now. If you'd like to come forward and pray for you, if that's your desire. But you say, Brother Jeff, I've got a problem with smoking and I want deliverance, and you sure can come forward. And maybe I'm embarrassing you or whatever, but if you'd like to come later, that's fine. But if you'd like to come now, we would like to make that available to you. God can set you free. Brother Branham said, I'd rather see my daughter, Brother Branham said this, stone drunk on the floor in the living room than to be smoking a cigarette. He said it's a filthy, dirty habit. He called it, and Brother Tom called it exactly what Brother Branham called it, a nicotine demon. Satan comes in there, you begin to smoke, and your body gets addicted, then an anointing comes with that, and then, but see, God can set you free. Out of curiosity, how many here were former smokers that God set free? Amen. Hallelujah. Amen. And Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And Brother Branham said it this way in various ways. He said it hundreds of times. He says, this will be the last sign, America, you will ever see. There will be no other prophetic, supernatural ministry like this. You'll never see it. He says the next thing you will see is the coming of the Lord. Absolutely the truth. The last sign you will ever see. And that sign was shadowed Elohim on the plains of Mamre, turning his back on the tent. How many times Brother Branham would turn his back on the audience and then call people out, row by row by row, name by name, person by person, with his back turned to the audience. He wasn't doing that for showmanship. He was doing that to show the sign of the Messiah, to show the sign of Elohim on the plains of Mamre. And what happened on the plains of Mamre? He told Abraham he would have a promised son according to the time of life, and would come through Sarah. That promised son was a prefigure of Jesus Christ himself. So what was it? What was it? We have had our thoughts and our intents of our hearts discerned, and we are now waiting for the return of the promised son. We're very close. 2 messengers went down to Sodom and Gomorrah and preached. 2 angels went down to Sodom. A regular Brother Branham said, modern day Billy Graham and Oral Roberts. And they had a message to the denominational church and to the Pentecostal church. But Brother Branham's message was to the elect lady of the last day. And to that elect lady, he stood, that why would God come to Abraham? Because he was separated. He was separated. He was living a separated life, not down in Sodom where Lot chose to go. Yes, the sins of Sodom vexed Lot's righteous soul, but Abraham was on the plains of Mamre living separated, and that's where the angel of the Lord came. Abraham saw 3 men walking to him, but Abraham said, my Lord. Amen. Because the one in the middle was God in flesh. And Brother Branham said it in a myriad of ways. He says, this ministry is Jesus Christ in every way except the corporal body. Now that to me is that to me is simple. That to me is easy to believe in light. The only way you could disbelieve that is because you're not in the tapes. Let me say it again. This ministry that we witnessed in our generation, that we have preserved on tape, was the ministry of Jesus Christ in every way except the corporal body. Absolutely. Why? Because it foreshadows the rapture. It foreshadows the coming of the Lord. Brother Branham said, we're going more and more after the 7 seals, and the 7th seal had been preached. He says, we are going more and more. He says, the kingdom of God is coming down. He says, we're going more and more from the negative to the positive. He says, that ought not to stumble you. He said, we've gone from Luther to Wesley to Pentecost, and now today. Then he says, now, if that is true, he says, I must decrease. Using the type of John the Baptist and Jesus, Brother Branham said, being Elijah, he said, I must decrease so that he can increase. And I say to you this morning, let him increase in your life. Let him increase in your life. Let him have total preeminence. Give him everything. Let him have total preeminence. Let's stand to our feet. Praise God. The Lord is good. If Brother Branham were here, Brother Tom Brown waxed preacher on me just for 1 second. He said, when Brother Branham was here, they filled the front rows. Amen. But a greater than Brother Branham is here. Amen. Can you say amen? Amen. Sure. Lord Jesus, I remember Gladys telling me the very same story that Tom started with. And Sister Gladys Dow, I asked her, I said, were you there when the pillar of fire came into the tabernacle and wrote the 7 church ages, the moons on the wall? She says, go back and listen to the tape, Brother Jeff. You'll hear a lady scream. He says, that lady was me. He said, she said, I was seeing the light on the front of the tabernacle. Brother Branham said, no, you're just seeing a reflection. Look behind you. And he says, we turned around and there were all 7 moons on the back of the church in pillar fire form. There's no 2 ways about it. God vindicated a messenger like Moses, amen, like Noah. We had a major prophet in our day, amen, to forerun the second coming of Jesus Christ. Amen. Are your lamps trimmed and clear? Are you ready? Is your heart right with God? Say, Brother Jeff, when will he come? Maybe tonight. Amen. Maybe not for another 50 years. No human being knows that. But one thing for sure, it'll be instantaneous and will be changed in the moment of a twinkling of an eye. There'll be no time to repent then. There'll be no more ability to be saved then. Let he who is filthy be filthy still. And let he who is righteous be righteous still. And if your life is not right with God, and the Lord was quickening the things that were being said to you this morning, then I urge you, get your life right with him now. Get your life right with him now. Serve him with all of your heart, not halfway.
I'm glad to have the opportunity to tell the things that I left out when I gave my testimony. When Uncle Bill was here and he had that heart attack, and Aunt Gladys, when all of us were standing out in the hallway, Gladys says to Brother Branham, Brother Branham had been a real good friend of F.F. Bosworth. Mm-hmm. And of course, F.F. Bosworth had been dead for 2 or 3 years before this. And Aunt Gladys says to Brother Branham, she says, how will we know the rapture's on? And Brother Branham says, take me for example. He says, I'll see Brother Bosworth again, and I'll have fellowship with him for 30 or 40 days. Mm-hmm. That backs up, Bible backs that up, And she says, what about the body change? He said, what's going to happen? What's going to be like? Will it be painful? What will happen? He says, yes, it'll be painful. He said, it'll be just for an instant. He said, this mortal has got to put on immortality. Okay? Well, a lot of times when they'd have double services at the tabernacle, people would stay and we would go over to, it was a famous restaurant that we all seemed to go to. It was called the Blue Boar Cafeteria over in Louisville. And there's always a huge group from the church went there. And this time, Brother Branham and his family, they were back in one section of the restaurant, and it was such an overflow crowd that the brothers and sisters kind of got split up. And a bunch of us brothers were sitting at one group of tables, and a bunch of the sisters were at another group of tables. And it was kind of a special day that Marilyn might want to tell you about.
No, it was I think it was about our 12th anniversary. I think it was in '62 in October. And we were sitting there, and I thought, well, now there he is way over on this table over here with the brothers, and here I am with the sisters, and it's our anniversary, and I was pouting. I was pouting, and that wasn't very nice to pout, but I was sitting there pouting because I thought, well, here we are, And then Brother Branham got up. He and his family were coming through, and they were leaving. And I don't know whether we said something, maybe somebody said something about our anniversary or something, but anyway, he said, well, Sister Brown, he says, on our anniversary, I'm always out hunting.
He caught her spirit, play that far away, That's what that happened quite a bit to him. And also, right when I was first committed to the message, of course, you always wonder if you got everything under the blood and if you got everything right, And I went to the altar, one time, and I told Brother Branham, I said, I just wish that I knew that for sure that everything was all right. And he told me, he says that I was a child that he'd begotten to the Lord. Made me feel good, yeah. And one time we went out to Phoenix, to one of the meetings out there in Phoenix, and this is Mom is along, and Brother and Sister Down, I think Marilyn and the girls, and all of us, the car was full. And we had kind of held back because Uncle Bill was just recovering from being in the hospital, and Mom wasn't too strong either for some reason or other. So we kind of waited till the last minute to leave. And they had this big, heavy Chrysler Imperial, and it had a big motor in it. It was heavy, it really rode nice, And I was driving out there, and I think it was New Mexico or somewhere, in this area it was real flat. There wasn't any traffic, very few houses even on the road, And everybody in the car was asleep but me. And I was passing these speed limit signs, I was going way past what the speed limit said. And the Holy Spirit was convicting me. And here I am driving all by myself, you might say, because everybody else is asleep. And Lord, if I'm doing wrong, you show me. Because that the reason I'm doing this, we want to be on time for the meeting. So we get into Phoenix, and it was 4 hours early. I wouldn't have had to go that fast. So we thought, so we're so early, we'll just go up and get something to eat. So we stopped at this steakhouse. The only people in that steakhouse was Brother Branham and his family. And after we all sit down, the first thing he says to me, how fast did you drive coming out here? So there. And also when Uncle Bill was, I told him about Uncle Bill when he was in the hospital where he had that, when he's spitting up blood. I saw one guy one time, it was in an automobile accident, and he died. And when he died, the blood just started turning blue. It was coming up like that. And Uncle Bill, they just brought Uncle Bill his meal. And I seen him look kind of strange, and all at once I seen blood starting to blue going up his neck. And I was sitting in a chair at the end of the bed, and I reached over and put my hand on his foot. And just as that blue color was going up, it started going back down. That quick, yeah.
They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover.
Yeah. And it, and also when we was going up on that elevator, I mentioned on the DVD that Brother Branham, I could feel him discerning my spirit, but I didn't say what he said. He said that I had a good, loyal, honest heart, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And another time, and one thing that I think that several reasons that Brother Branham liked Uncle Bill. One of them was his faith. Uncle Bill had great faith. He was quite old, and he'd get sick quite often, and whoever prayed for him, he believed he'd be healed. And we was in Dallas when Brother Branham had that series of meetings in Dallas, and Uncle Bill had a heart attack, and I had to rush him out to the hospital. We went to the same hospital that John F. Kennedy died in, and I can understand now why he died in that hospital. Because we went to that hospital, and the nurse came in and checked Uncle Bill. Yes, he's having a heart attack, and Uncle Bill's laying on one of those little beds that they have in the emergency ward. And she went out of the room. Of course, everybody was praying for Bill, and nobody was there, but I mean, they all knew that I had to rush him to the hospital, so all the saints was praying for Uncle Bill. And about 10 minutes passed, and he sits up on the edge of the bed. He's getting to feel better. Another 10 minutes passed, says, "Come on, let's get out of here." And we left. We left that hospital. Nobody ever come in. I just wonder whatever they thought when they finally did come in and see somebody with a heart attack, he's gone. Wasn't too long after that, we was back in Jeffersonville. And Debbie and Tammy had been pretty good buddies of Sarah, their Brother Branham's second daughter. And Brother Branham was preaching this Sunday, and he was going to be preaching the next Sunday. So Debbie and Tammy was trying to get Sarah to come up to visit us. And you tell them what happened, yeah.
Well, Brother Branham was sitting in his car, and I was a little ways from him, but the girls wanted me to ask him, and if Sarah could come home with us. So I said, Brother Branham, I said, could Sarah come home with the girls and stay a week, then we'll bring her back the next Sunday. And he looked at me, and he looked at me, and he looked at me, and finally he said, "Yes, Sister Brown, she can come." But I don't know what he was looking, I don't know what he saw. But
And also, Brother Branham told me one time out there in Phoenix, we were down in Tucson this time, I think. But anyway, he was telling us about the time he was up in Sabina Canyon, and the sword appeared in his hand. Yeah, he was telling us all about that, and he told me that he saw an Indian chief while he was up there from Ohio. That was strange, yeah. He never did elaborate on that, but he saw an Indian chief up there at the same time he got that sword in his hand, Indian chief from Ohio. And we were in a Ramada Inn down in the restaurant when he was telling us all about this. And they had booths, and we were sitting at this one booth, a table, and Brother Branham was there with us, explaining all this to us. And then in the next booth, right beside us, right beside Brother Branham, in fact, his back was to Brother Branham, was a drunk. And this drunk he was just gabbling on, and he was trying to get in on our conversation, And it was always amazing to me the way Brother Branham acted. I mean, he didn't rebuke the man. He didn't make him feel bad, but yet it's just as though he just ignored him, you know. But in such a gentle way. I mean, it's really something. And then I'd like to close with one more thing here. I mentioned how that when they took the body away at the tabernacle, how the sun looked like the face of a clock. Mm-hmm. Some of the people were commenting back and forth to it. And there was quite a few people there who loved Brother Branham, but never received him as a prophet. Mm-hmm. And someone would ask them these people could not see it. And that's strange. Only the believers could see that sun do that. So I hope that this will help a little bit to make up for what I left off. And I want to say God bless you all. We'll leave about 3:30 in the morning.
On Sunday morning.
3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And you'd be there all day?
Yeah.
And
sometimes we'll go down Saturday afternoon, you know.
And stay all night. But then we'd go down. Sometimes if we found out he was going to preach, then we'd even stay.
Yeah.
I don't know how he drove that way, but we'd even stay for the evening service and come back home.
We'd go down there
3 o'clock the next morning.
And coming back to no gas stations and open that car, be on empty, and she just would pray it on in.
Yeah.
We'd pray it on in. He'd come in on the fumes, I think.
Yeah.
I remember when your grandma, she had something up for surgery or something, you know, and Brother Branham came off to the car and he took her hand, you know, and it showed on his hand, you know, and I can remember him holding her hand in the back seat of the car.
She was healed.
And she was healed.
That's right.
And then another time I phoned him for her too, because she was sick another time, and I phoned him about her, and he had prayer right then over the phone for her, and she was healed.
Yes, right. That's right.
Mm-hmm. I remember going out to their house. They lived out here past Elida. And I remember getting out of the car because I wanted to go in and tell her so badly, you know, about him praying for her. And they had this big dog that came out. And he was barking at me. I thought, I'm on the Lord's duty. I've got to get in there. I'm not going to care for you anyway. So I just went right on up the house because I knew to tell Edna that she was going to be all right. Brother Branham said she'd be all right.
Uncle Bill and Aunt Gladys, they always said that they needed somebody to drive them. That's how I got to go all the time. You know, there was a polite way of paying my bill, I guess.
Yeah.
But I always took them up on it, you know, and I'd drive them around. And I had a little platform built that was set over the transmission of the car, and I'd bought an inverter that changed from the 12-volt DC to 110-volt AC. Of course, it wasn't real good because the faster you go, the faster it would go, you know. But still, was able to hear Brother Branham in the car all the time, you know. And but sometimes Uncle Bill would fall asleep, and his leg would hit the take-up reel. And of course, all that tape would be on the floor.
And that was my job. Usually, I'd sit and rewind it by hand. Yeah, I'd carry that big tape recorder. I mean, those were heavy things, you know. And so when I cleaned the house, then I just left the tape recorder and take it from room to room and clean and listen to the tapes.
Yeah.
One time I heard serpent seed, and I was scrubbing the living room carpet down on my knees, and all at once the carpet was clean, and I didn't even remember cleaning it. I was so involved in the serpent seed message that.
Oh yeah, it was fantastic. Everybody was under such expectation here because a lot of people had been married before, you know, before they come into the message, you know, and they didn't know whether they was going to have to separate from one another or what, you know. Because a lot of them, you know, they would have done that if they thought they would have had it done. They would have just left one another and lived single the rest of their life, you know. But when Brother Branham said that those who follow the message, they're forgiven, you know, it was wonderful. It was such a relief for them, you know. Yeah. But then also too, I forgot to tell you about the after when they brought the body back. all that evening. You know, there was all different strange things in the tree. You see it like an image in the tree of a lion or something. Remember that?
The lights were all strange, you know.
Everything. It was all vindication, you know. But it was amazing, you know. I don't know what it all meant. No, I never saw it like, but Uncle Bill did.
Uncle Bill saw.
Uncle Bill saw one time. He said it was like a lick of fire that came at him from the pulpit.
Oh.
Yeah. About the time that Brother Branham was telling him about his being, no way he could miss it, you know. Brother Dow, you remember that one tape that he says that, no way you can miss it, brother. Yeah. Had quite an insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're sure blessed people to have the Lord reveal this precious message to any of us, you know.
Absolutely right.
Especially the people that didn't have the opportunity to see Brother Branham personally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how that God has revealed it to them, you know, and they're so sincere and they're so informed, you know. And it has to be God that would reveal all these things to the people that didn't have the benefit of Marilyn and I and others that actually saw Brother Branham, but yet it's so real to them, you know. It's just part of their life, you know. It's just wonderful.
Yeah.